Off from his criminal hush money trial yesterday to host a dinner at Mara Lago. A source tells NBC News Trump welcomed buyers of his digital trading cards to Mara Lago last night. According to a copy of the invitation obtained by Axios, the dinner was for supporters who bought at least 47 of the cards priced at $99 each. Some of those same buyers also were expected to receive physical pieces of the suit Trump was wearing when he had his mugshot taken after he was arrested in Fulton County, Georgia. Back in August.
What the holy F is going on here?
Oh,
who are these people?
I mean, what do? You frame the piece of the suit? You sniff it? Do you keep it at your bedside? Well, I don't know what you do with that.
In the bomber jacket. Now that is really quite a. What did they do? Take Tom Cruise and then just put Trump's head on it? I mean, that is actual, just complete propaganda.
And he had him at Mara Lago. He had a day off from his criminal hush money trial. So what do? You bring in the people who spent 10 grand on your NFTs and little pieces of the suit from your mugshot, which undoubtedly are not from that suit, but that's for another day. As for today, Stormy Daniels set to return to the witness stand this morning, where the defense will continue its cross-examination. On Tuesday, Daniels described a sexual encounter she says she had with Trump in 2006. The judge denied a defense motion for a mistrial after Trump's attorneys called Daniels' testimony unnecessary and prejudicial toward Trump. Prosecutors have indicated they plan to redirect or ask Daniels follow-up questions once the defense wraps up its questioning. Trump denies charges of falsifying business records to hide a $130,000 hush money payment made to Daniels by Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen. The former president also denies any sexual encounter with Daniels. Let's bring in former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent, Lisa Rubin. All right, Lisa, a little bit of a day off yesterday, back at it this morning. Where do we pick up from where we were on Tuesday?
Well, where we were on Tuesday was sort of a scorched earth cross-examination of Stormy Daniels. But among the subjects touched, guess which one wasn't really touched? Whether or not the episode happened as she described it. So Susan Necheles really going after her for a variety of perceived inconsistencies in her story, and most notably, whether or not in 2011 she had been approached in a parking lot in Las Vegas while she was with her infant daughter and threatened not to reveal more of the story. That was largely a focus of the cross-examination. So one of the things I'll be looking for today is, do they actually return to the story itself and try to counter its veracity, or do they poke around at the margins, trying to make Stormy Daniels seem not credible and focused only on money? I will tell you that at one point they did try to focus on her interest in money, and I thought she got the better of them in this exchange. Question, well, do you recall testifying that you started acting in pornography because you wanted to make more money, right? Answer, correct. Question, and it's that simple. You wanted more money, right? Answer, don't we all in our jobs? Question, and that's why you started acting in pornography, right? Answer, to get a pay increase for my dancing, yes. Question, that motivates you a lot in life, making more money, right? And then Stormy Daniels with this classic answer, well, it is the United, that's what we do here. So I'm looking forward to Stormy Daniels sort of giving as good as she gets today. I thought she was a more focused witness on cross-examination. The longer that cross-examination goes on, so long as she can keep her answers tight and her temper in check, I think that makes her more sympathetic to the jury and more credible as well, Willie.
They also tried to get her to sound like someone who has an axe to grind with Donald Trump, and just asked explicitly, do you hate Donald Trump? And she said yes. Does that hurt her in some ways, making it sound like this is some personal vendetta?
Well, she was then asked, and you want to see him go to jail, correct? And she said, I want to see him held accountable. I thought the honesty of the answer was a good thing, to try and hide from that, given the multiplicity of her public statements about her feelings about Trump. You can't really run away from that. So it was good for her to be candid in that moment, and also to focus that hatred on her own experience with him and her pain. That's an encounter that, as we've talked about previously, she understands maybe differently now than she did at an earlier point in time, and certainly maybe differently than we all understood it. You know, this was a late night punchline for many of us for a long time. The Stormy Daniels who came into court on Tuesday, who talked about her sexual encounter with Donald Trump, painted it in a very different light. I wouldn't call it a sexual assault, and neither did she, but it was clear that it was something less than full consent for her and a very painful experience. And so given the hatred was somewhat more explicable.
Yeah, and Lisa, you know, I mean, as far as the jury looking at the witness, you know, getting pushed, did you do this for money? If she said, no, I did it for the art, you know, people, yes, I did it for the money. Do you hate Donald Trump? Yes, she says. She hates Donald Trump. And there have been some commentators suggesting that somehow the cross-examination hurt her credibility. I think you'd probably agree with me, with the jury looking to try to pick apart somebody's credibility. The fact that she told the truth in both of those cases, as you just said, actually makes the jury go, yeah, all right, for good reason. If somebody did that to me, if somebody called me horseface, if somebody was constantly mocking me on social media, if somebody was ridiculing me and lying about an encounter that we had, yeah, I wouldn't like them. And yeah, we're in America. We want to make more money. She said she wanted to make more money. Seems to me both of those answers that were supposed to undermine her credibility only built it up.
I think that's true. Joe, I will tell you the one place where I think she has significant problems with her credibility is sort of the pendulum swing between not wanting her story to come out in 2011 and by 2016 wanting it to come out. Now, one of those differences is the realization that you could make money from it, and that's not something necessarily to shy away from. But she says that wasn't her motivation. She said that safety was her motivation, that in 2011 she was threatened to be quiet, and she did keep quiet, not even telling her husband about that encounter. But by 2016, she testified, the ballgame had changed. Once he was a major party presidential candidate and not just a reality TV star, she felt that the best way to keep herself safe was to get out in front of the story, make it public so that she was therefore almost untouchable once he was the GOP nominee. Whether or not that story holds up on continued cross is going to be interesting to see, because she sort of vacillated about that and whether money was an interest for her. But at the end of the day, what prosecution needs to get out of this is not whether Stormy Daniels passes the beer test, right? That's the test we apply to our presidential candidates. Do you want to have a beer with this person? That's not necessary for a key witness in a trial. They just have to believe that if she came forward in 2016, told the story she told the jury, that would have been hugely damaging to Donald Trump. That's the reason that she's there, and that's what prosecutors want the jury to walk away with.
So, Lisa, let's move to another Trump legal case. The former president got a win earlier this week down in Florida when Judge Cannon delayed that trial. And now Georgia, where a Georgia court says it will take up the Trump team's appeal of the DA's disqualification ruling there. Is that going to lead to, how do you think that plays out, and what sort of delays might that produce?
Well, right now, it doesn't stay the case necessarily. However, practically speaking, I think it will cause delays in that case going to trial. And so if you're Donald Trump and your MO is not to go to trial in most of these cases before the election or even at all, the Georgia case can't obviously be stopped by his reelection. But I think it's a huge victory for him and his team in that this is one more case that's not likely to go to trial anytime this year.
MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin on her way back downtown to the courthouse. We'll talk to you again tomorrow morning, Lisa. Thanks. Coming up, the economy is growing, but inflation, of course, remains a challenge. Steve Ratner joins us in just a moment with a look at what it all means for consumers as Election Day closes in. Morning Joe will be right back. Overwhelmingly voted to save House Speaker Mike Johnson after Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene tried and failed to oust him from leadership. Greene, who's threatened to force the issue for weeks now, introduced the motion to vacate after 2 days of back-to-back meetings with Speaker Johnson. Her own colleagues were quick to boo and jeer her on the House floor.
The form of the resolution is as follows. Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant.
There are the boos. The vote to table Greene's motion to vacate was 359 to 43. Only 10 Republicans even sided with Greene. Speaker Johnson spoke to reporters after the vote.
I want to say that I appreciate the show of confidence from my colleagues to defeat this misguided effort. That is certainly what it was. Hopefully, this is the end of the personality politics and the frivolous character assassination that has defined the 118th Congress. It's regrettable. It's not who we are as Americans, and we're better than this. We need to get beyond it. In this moment, the country desperately needs a functioning Congress, and that's what the overwhelming majority of the members in this body demonstrated today.
So, Joe, it was pretty clear before the vote yesterday that it was going to fail. Marjorie Taylor Greene was going to fail in her attempt to oust the Speaker. But I'm not sure we fully understood how bad the margin against her would be, that only 10 Republicans, after all this fury and all this sound and all these press conferences and all her interviews where she said she's leading the charge to get rid of him, just completely was blown out in the vote, falling flat in her attempt to get rid of the Speaker.
Right, and all the threats that were made against him if he did a continuing resolution, if he kept the government open, if he provided aid to Israel, if he provided aid to Ukraine, if he provided aid to Taiwan, all of those threats just fell by the wayside. And, it raises the question that extraordinary profile, that Atlantic profile asked as a subheading, what if this guy may end up being good at this job? Right now, Jackie, it's looking like he's going to far outpace all expectations for him.
That is until November, Joe. I think Johnson made a little bit of a miscalculation when he was negotiating the Ukraine and the Israel supplemental package in not changing the rules around being allowed to sort of bring up the motion to vacate on a snap vote, as we've seen Marjorie Taylor Greene do. Democrats stepped in to save him this time around, but we'll see how long that good faith and this sort of mutually beneficial relationship continues. As Trump said in his statement last night, now is not the time, Marge. Basically, there is this sort of feeling that this mutually assured destruction within the Republican Party is not good for keeping the majority and Republicans' re-election chances. Hence, I think Trump's statement is a political calculus here, and I think we're going to see this basically play out until November, and then after that, we'll get back to the Republican Civil War that we're so used to seeing play out.
Yeah, at least we had fellow Republicans calling Marjorie Taylor Greene Moscow Marjorie, saying that she fails again. What does this moment tell us, and maybe the Ukraine vote as well, the Ukraine aid vote, tell us about the power of MAGA extremists inside the House? Is it waning? Is it there? Is it just to raise money? I mean, to some extent, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't care that this failed. She's going to raise money in her district and get reelected and all that and make perhaps Donald Trump happy in some way. But what did we learn by this vote?
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't care about governing. So for her, she gets headlines, failed headlines, not the best headlines, but she gets to show fealty to Trump. And at the same time, since she doesn't care about the outcome, it doesn't matter to her. But then as the months go by, how much is the foreign policy and the supporting votes of these House lawmakers, how much is that going to be an election issue in this contentious election year, especially in these swing districts where people are a little bit more divided, frankly, over Biden's foreign policy and also what the GOP's isolationist bent has wrought too.
Yeah, I think they both come out of this sort of weakened. I mean, Johnson gets to keep his job, but Democrats had to save him. We'll see what how he's able to lead it going forward. Marjorie Taylor Greene's, obviously that result yesterday was embarrassing, but she's still getting favorable news coverage at a lot of conservative sites, and she's going to raise money off of it, no doubt. White House aides I spoke to in the last day or so about this, look, they give Johnson credit that at the end of the day, he got to where he needed to. He did the right thing on the Ukraine deal, even though he knew he would pay a political price. They now expect that he'll have to be a thorn in their side going forward to sort of get some political cover and appease those on the far right. But there isn't that much in terms of serious legislative business that's going to get done the rest of the year anyway.
Jackie, do you think the MAGA extremists are weakened by this vote yesterday, or is this just a moment in time?
I think because of the way the House is structured, with districts being so gerrymandered and some people's districts just being so red, that catering to the base is never going to really hurt some of these far-right lawmakers whose constituents completely buy into the strategy of actively trying not to govern. None of these people have viable primary challengers. They're going into November pretty safe. But who it does hurt are their colleagues in vulnerable districts. And I think it increases the chances the more they have this kind of infighting of Democrats actually being able to take back the House, even if potentially Trump does win the presidency.
Joe?
But you know, the crazy thing really is, though, they don't care if they lose the majority. They really don't. In fact, being in the minority is better for these people because they're on the backbench. They can attack the Democratic speaker. They can attack the Democratic president. They can attack the Democratic Senate. I mean, this is actually, it is such a bizarre, backward way of thinking. But they now think they can raise money whether they're in the majority or the minority. And if they're in the majority, they actually are looked to get things done. That actually cuts against their business plan, against their governing by gesture, because you actually have to do things in the majority. And when you don't, people start to notice, like they're starting to notice with Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're in the minority, no responsibility. You're not going to get anything done. So your gesturing can become even more grand.
Right.
And that's the real problem for Marjorie Taylor Greene and these others that they present to the Republican Party. It's like Chip Royce screaming on the House floor, name one thing that we've gotten done. And it's going to be a real challenge going into the election for the Republicans.
Yeah, objectively, one of the least productive Congresses in the history of the country. And as you say, much easier to just throw bombs from the backbench politically when you're not in power. Republicans a little more unified on some national security issues. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is refusing to agree to a ceasefire deal unless Israel can move forward with its military operation in Rafah. 4 current and 1 former U.S. official tell NBC News Netanyahu is demanding Rafah be walled off from the proposal. Negotiations are still underway in Cairo, but yesterday Hamas announced it will not make any more concessions. The terrorist group agreed to a 3-part ceasefire, which includes a 42-day pause in fighting, as well as the phased release of hostages in exchange for many Palestinian prisoners. The main sticking point is in the second phase, which calls for a, quote, sustainable calm, a vague term. Hamas sees that as an end to the war. Israel does not. Meanwhile, President Biden says he will halt the shipment of some weapons to Israel, including 2,000-pound bombs, if the IDF invades Rafah.
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently.
The president's interview with CNN aired just hours after Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin publicly acknowledged the United States did pause a delivery of thousands of bombs last week. Many top Republicans are outraged by that decision. In a rare joint letter, Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell demanded an explanation from the president, saying, quote, security assistance Israel is an urgent priority. The Republican chairs of the House Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees also blasted that decision, calling it appalling. In the Senate, Lindsey Graham grilled Secretary Austin about the delay in arms during an Appropriations Committee hearing yesterday.
Okay, so Israel's been hit in the last few weeks by Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, dedicated to their destruction. And you're telling me you're going to tell them how to fight the war and what they can and can't use when everybody around them wants to kill all the Jews? And you're telling me that if we withhold weapons in this fight, the existential fight for the life of the Jewish state, it won't send the wrong signal? Do you still think it was a good idea, General Austin, to get out of Afghanistan?
I support the president's decision.
Yeah, I think you do. I think it was a disastrous decision. If we stop weapons necessary to destroy the enemies of the state of Israel at a time of great peril, we will pay a price. This is obscene. It is absurd. Give Israel what they need to fight the war they can't afford to lose. This is Hiroshima and Nagasaki on steroids.
Oh, my God, what a hypocrite. What a hypocrite. What a hypocrite. Republicans sat on their hands for months refusing to give Israel aid. Republicans sat on their hands for months, refusing to give Ukraine aid. Republicans sat on their hands for months, refusing to give Taiwan aid it needed to push back the communist Chinese from invading their island for months. And now Lindsay, first of all, try some sunscreen, buddy. Lindsay is talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We saw, well, hey, Lindsay, I don't know if you're on a golf trip when Iran fired thousands of missiles at Israel. Maybe you didn't remember this. Maybe you don't want to remember this. Maybe Donald Trump told you not to remember this. Maybe you've been hanging out with RFK Jr. and maybe a worm like ate out part of your brain so you don't have this memory. Here's the United States of America who stood up for Israel. It was the United States of America that provided the main defense in stopping those Iranian missiles from coming in. It was the United States of America. It was Joe Biden. It was the administration that told Iran we would always stand by Israel's side. And we are standing by Israel's side now and forever. But that doesn't mean we send 2,000-pound bombs for Netanyahu to drop on a densely populated area that has over 1 million people there right now and no place to go. That's your definition of an existential threat? They're killing Hamas commanders as we speak without 2,000-pound bombs. They will kill and continue to kill Hamas commanders. Hamas isn't taking Gaza over again, and you know it. So stop lying. Stop lying. I know it's hard because Donald Trump wants you to say things like that. Willie, if I'm going, I support Ukraine, and then Donald Trump says, don't support Ukraine, and his hound dog barks, don't support Ukraine, suddenly he goes, I don't support Ukraine no more. We're going to lease them weapons. What? A country is dying because of Russian invaders? And Vladimir Putin says he has his eyes set on Poland and the Baltic states? And Donald tells you, Lindsay, not to support Ukraine and to hold up funding for Israel and to hold up funding for Taiwan. And you're providing lectures to the Secretary of Defense? What a joke. I don't know if you know this, but we have video, right? They create, okay, so they had film, and I don't know, Willie, maybe they created film in maybe the 1880s or something. And then that film at some point turned into videotape. I don't know when it was. Everybody was buying VHSs in the 70s. My dad decided he had a Betamax.
He was
okay, that tells you all you need to know. My dad played the long game, Lindsay. But even my dad's Betamax could record you saying, we're not giving support for Israel and Taiwan and Ukraine unless we loan them the money. Come, what are you watching World War II movies? This isn't 1940 and you're not FDR. Good Lord, Willie, I tell you, this has got my hackles up. I mean, come on, what's he doing? Does he really think we're that stupid? They were the ones holding up support for Israel for months, and now he's doing the Jimmy Swaggart routine, crying, being self-righteous, when we know what happened. Come on, Lindsay. We may have been born at night, Lindsay, but we weren't born last night. How's that? Was that pretty good, Willie?
And the good people at Betamax, thank you for that reference too. They're trying to get things going again. It's been a long road.
I'm trying to get free supplies because I got my dad's Betamax machine. I just don't have the tapes.
Everything
it seems
comes
they stopped
back,
making
Joe.
them in 1984.
You know how vinyl came back? Beta's about to come back. I can feel it. I can feel it in my bones, you know? But you're, of course, right. Lindsey Graham, first of all, has long held himself out as a supporter of Ukraine, a defender of Ukraine, until Donald Trump yanked the chain and the leash and said, don't do that right now.
Yeah.
We're not.
Yeah.
So he stepped away from that. And we should point out it took months and months and months, but finally there was a foreign aid package passed last month. They got $14 billion worth of aid to Israel. So they are getting what they need. In this case, John, the White House just making the point that Joe just made. We're not going to supply. We're going to see how you go into Rafah, but we're not going to give you 2,000-pound bombs to be dropped in an urban setting. But the idea that the White House has cut off aid to Israel is preposterous and just objectively wrong.
Right. So the president made that point clear. Just a few weeks ago, it was Americans not only sent weapons to Israel to defend itself against Iran's barrage of drone and rocket attacks, their Iron Dome. The U.S. continues to do that. And in fact, U.S. assets helped shoot down a lot of those rockets. They're defending Israel. The president this week in his Holocaust memorial speech made clear, he's like, we stand with Israel, but you can at times disagree with a friend. And they disagree right now with the plan to go into Rafah. The president in this interview said, look, there's been limited Israeli incursions into Rafah. We think that's acceptable. They've been targeted at Hamas leaders. What we oppose is an all-out invasion that will lead to devastating civilian casualties and add to the humanitarian crisis. And President Biden last night, look, he's reached his red line. He's like, we are not going to give you offensive weapons to go into use in an invasion of Rafah, whether that's bombs or artillery or anything of the sort. And he acknowledged for the first time that, yes, undoubtedly, it has been some American weapons used by the Israeli military that's killed civilians in Gaza. And he's like, that's unacceptable. We do not want that to occur. So, Jackie, we just got the Republican reaction. A lot of Lindsey Graham speaking for many of them, though others perhaps not quite as hysterically, about their anger about this. And we heard McConnell and Johnson also express concern about the delay in weapons. Tell us, though, about the Democrats' response. So many of them have been voicing this concern that Israel was going too far in Gaza. Did what they hear from the president satisfy them?
I think for now, as we were talking about earlier this morning, there is this report coming from the administration that's basically going to take an assessment of just how many civilian casualties have been caused by U.S.-sourced bombs, something that's all really been a source of concern and trepidation for Democrats as they're kind of bracing for the ultimate findings from the intel community on this. But this is long overdue in the minds of Democrats, many of whom have become increasingly vocal about the Biden administration adjusting their policy towards Israel. There have long been complaints from the progressive flank of the party that the relationship is far too friendly, that we hold Netanyahu and Israel to a far different standard, especially when it comes to human rights abuses and actually taking stock of what is going on and sort of the lack of oversight of the civilian casualties. And so it's something Dems are keeping a close eye on. Of course, as we also were talking about, it's a really tricky political dance right now, especially as Republicans are trying to weaponize this against Democrats, painting Democrats as anti-Semitic and as wavering in the face of turmoil in the Middle East.
Elise?
He's not going to win necessarily politically on this by this stage in the game. This might be a more sound policy move. Indeed, we do not need to be just indiscriminately handing out 2,000-pound bombs when they already have dropped more tonnage in Gaza than we did, the kind of bombs that we dropped against ISIS in Mosul were, these bombs are about 4 times that. We don't need to just fuel that when there already is such a humanitarian crisis. But he's not necessarily going, this is, a baby step for the left. It's not going to satisfy the hard right, who also, as you see with Lindsey Graham, are all over it. And it doesn't matter if they're completely hypocritical and nonsensical, they're still going to weaponize it.
Well, I mean, not just they are hypocritical. They are nonsensical. Willie also, they know absolutely nothing about history. And I guess you don't have to if you just look at TikTok and Instagram Reels, I guess. I mean, because you look back at the United States history, And I could talk about Democratic presidents all day, but let's talk about Republican presidents. It was Dwight Eisenhower during the Suez Crisis that pulled the Israelis back and said, no, enough. That's it. They said no to the Israelis and to the British and stopped an attack with a threat. And that was an existential crisis for both Israel and Britain. You could look at Ronald Reagan, who in 1981, after the bombing of Iraq, Ronald Reagan actually suspended sale of F-16s to Israel and said, because of your attack, your bombing, we're not going to give you F-16s. A year later, over strenuous objections from Begin and the Israelis, he sold AWACS to the Saudis. It was a huge crisis for Israel. Reagan went ahead with it because he was worried about U.S. interests.
How it works is you got a 98% offset, okay? There's big gaps here is when you're selling a whole bunch of electricity back to the utility company.